reached the appointed hour. Now we have reached the appointed hour and we have a quorum. The meeting is now called to order. First, the election of the chairman of the subcommittee to study the third technical memorandum for allocation of emission allowances in respect of special specified licenses. We need the nomination of a candidate and then seconded by another member. I nominate Mr. Ho and then seconded by Mr. Kenneth Chen. Any other nomination? If not, then we don't need to change our seats then. We don't need a vice chairman, don't we? Do we? No. No, we don't. And then let's invite the officials in. Apart from Mr. Chen Haken, every member who has signed up has arrived. We need to meet with the government officials, and very soon there will be a tariff increase. The emission control arrangement involves capital investment, and we need to speak with to the administration on emission control, and then capital investment, air quality, so on and so forth. May I welcome the government officials for coming, and they are Mr. Andrew Lai, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection, Mr. Mok Wai Chin, Assistant Director of Policy Environmental Protection Department. Have you changed your responsibility? Were you responsible for genetic food? I may also welcome Mr. Peng Sik Wing, Principal Environmental Protection Officer, Air Policy, EPD, and they are very good technical officials responsible for air policy, and we used to have good communication. Now the formula is complicated. Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. As said by the Chairman, it sounds complicated, but there are only a few salient points. The power plants are the major sources of air pollution. Through the APCO, we set out the technical memorandum. Every 2 years, we impose a cap on the emission by the power plants. And according to the APCO, we need to review the cap every 2 years, and for the 3 types of pollutants, a cap will be imposed for the power plants. And we consider 3 factors. What are the practical means for the power plants to cut emission? We need to comply with the AQO, and we need to protect public health. And these are the 3 major factors set out in the law. As for the third technical memorandum, if it is approved by this Council, it will come into effect in 2017. As for the third technical memorandum, it is based on the second technical memorandum. We impose the limits of the 3 power plants of the 2 power companies. If you may refer to para 7 of the paper concerning the pollutants. Now, each power company, or rather each power plant, for each pollutants, the cut will be by 6 to 23%. we take into account various factors in setting the limits or caps. We consider the real-time emission, and in fact we are doing that by electronic means. We know the concentration and quantity of the emission on an hourly basis. We've looked at the performance of the power plants, and we find that their emission control facilities are rather advanced, and the facilities are well maintained. And if they are able to maintain this performance, they have further room for cutting emission. We don't ask for additional facilities. We don't ask for additional machinery. In fact, we find their emission control facilities rather efficient. The second element is the fuel mix. We've made reference to the fuel mix in the second technical memorandum. The ratio between gas and coal is 50-50. We don't ask the power companies to consume more gas vis-à-vis coal. In fact, in the second memorandum, we have already asked the power companies to reduce the proportion of coal. So in the short term, we don't need to substantially increase the ratio of gas. The power companies, in terms of using coal as fuel, if they can use more environmentally friendly fuel, environmentally friendly coal, they will be able to reduce their emission further. So the two power companies have practical means to cut emission without the need of making substantial capital investment. We need to consider the power consumption in Hong Kong. Power consumption in Hong Kong is rising year by year. Between 2015 and 2017, power consumption will continue to rise, and we need to take that into account when we consider the emission control cap. And having taken into account all these matters, we've come up with these limits. And we've also taken into account the development of renewable energy. The two previous technical memoranda only took into account gas-fire and coal-fire power. But we've noticed that the two power companies have completed renewable energy facilities. Say, the HEC has wind power generation and also solar power generation. And then there will also be WTE waste-to-energy facility to be completed. We would like to encourage the power companies to give priority to renewable energy and WTE. Whether it is RE or WTE, no matter what the capacity of generation capacity is, the two power companies should first make use of RE and WTE before they use gas-fire and coal-fire generation. Now, the RE and WTE are zero-emission generation. And we have to assume the RE and WTE first, and then they will use gas-fire and coal-fire generation. So that part of the emission will be deducted. And we also need to take into account factors that are beyond human control. Say, for example, the climate have affected solar power generation or the WTE is subject to is affected by certain factors, and therefore some adjustment will be made to the emission. In the technical memorandum, we have introduced the elements of RE and WTE to adjust the emission limits. This is only a small proportion. The percentage of RE in power generation vis-à-vis the total power generation of the two power companies is only 0.01 something %. You should not have a high hope that with RE and WTE there will be less consumption of gas or coal. This is only just a starting point. We should encourage the power companies to make use of these facilities. But they only account for a very small proportion. It is just the starting point. When the two power companies have plans to develop new wind farms, and when they have completed such facilities, then we will make use of the technical memorandum and reflect it in the technical memorandum. And then by then there will be less use of gas-fired and coal-fired generation. That's why we've put in a bit of coverage on the use of RE and WTE. Although the coverage in our paper is bigger and the calculation is complicated, but the percentage in respect of power generation is rather small. The technical memorandum will be updated once every 2 years to see if there can be further room for reduction of emission. In 2014, we will formulate another technical memorandum that will come into effect in 2019. And if there is a new policy, say, for example, more consumption of gas for power generation, then we will reflect that in the memorandum as well. Thank you very much. Now, concerning pricing, I have a question on pricing. Paragraph 4. Now, this is according to the gas supply contract, the take or pay. Concerning the take or pay natural gas supply contracts, can you supply us with more information?
Concerning take or pay, the two power companies have been using natural gas, and according to this take or pay arrangement, according to the agreement, even if the power companies don't wish to use so much natural gas, well, as the amount has been stipulated in the contracts, even if the gas is not used up, the pay has to be made, and under this arrangement, the power companies will have to use the natural gas first, and this will be an incentive for power companies to make use of natural gas for power generation. As for West Sea's transmission of natural gas, the pipelines are almost completed, and as for the overall policy, the policy is formulated by my colleagues from the Environmental Bureau, and so far we don't have any information at hand. The EAP will, of course, called for meetings concerning the tariffs of the two power companies. But this is a strange policy because despite it being one of the environmental affairs, it's listed as an item for the panel on economic development. So, members, questions, please, Mr. Sin Chung Kai. Now, I'd like to ask about Table 1A, 1B, and 1C, and, well, altogether there are 4 tables. I mean, adjustment is possible based on the power to be generated. For example, for a Black Point Power Station in Table 1B, for SO2 is 1440, for nitrogen oxides it's 4,140. And B, it says here that it is the aggregate of the total net sent out electricity output. Why is there a difference here? Perhaps I'll defer to my colleague, Mr. Pang. Now, Madam Chair, for these 4 power stations, these are the allocation of allowances for them. Now, for this Black Point Power Station, because it uses natural gas, whereas for Penny Bay's gas turbine power station, this is for emergency purposes. So the purposes are different. As for the Lama and Castle Peak Power Station, these are coal-fired generation units. Well, 2 different formulas are used for different power stations because for the 2 stations mentioned, because of the uncertainties in the RE and WTE power generation, adjustment will be made. Whereas for, say, Lama power generation, according to the best practicable means, we calculate the amount of reduction possible. Say for sulfur dioxide, it can be reduced by 5,200, and then we consider the actual sent out electricity output of RE and WTE, and it's included in the formula. Why is it that this formula is only applied to Lama Power Station and Castle Peak Power Station? Well, if the output of RE and WTE is used to display the output of other power stations, we consider that the output from the coal-fired generation units should be displaced first. So if output from RE and WTE is available, then reduction should be displayed, or the power generated from the coal-fired generation units should be displaced first. And for this Penny's Bay gas turbine power station, the allowances are 2, 2, and 1. And for this power station, it's fuel. It's oil-fired generation. It's for backup purpose. It's for peak loading purposes. So the annual consumption is not high, perhaps only for summer. So we only allow 2 tons for, say, sulfur dioxide. The allowance amount is small, because if it's standing power generation, the emission allowance won't be so small. But as I said, it's only for emergency and peak loading purposes. It is not a power generation that is for regular use. I want to ask about capital A. The limit is 5,200, say that's the allowance for sulfur dioxide, and then plus bracket 2 minus A, and according to the footnote, A is the aggregate of total net sent out electricity output from individual RE and WTE to the electricity grid of Lemma Power Station. So how does this net sent out energy output translate into the tons? May I explain the latter part of the formula? I explained about the former bit, the 5,200, that is for Lemma Power Station. That is the amount of emission to be reduced for sulfur dioxide according to the BPM. As for the latter part, we anticipate the annual intake of RE and WTE for Lemma Power Station of HEC, and that's 2 gigawatt. And in fact, we cannot only confine the sources of RE and WTE to the ones we mentioned, like wind farms and solar panels. There may be other sources, but at present we already have 2 sources of WTE energy. And A means the total net out electricity output from all the RE and WTE, and if the intake is actually 2 GWH, that means there is no need for any adjustment. And if A is larger than 2 in such circumstances, then this will be deducted from the emission cap. So if 2 minus A results in a negative number, is it what you mean? Yes. The emission allowance will be reduced as a result. I'm sorry, if A means total net sent out electricity and output, it means the output from the intake of individual RE and WTE. Let me explain to Mr. Sin. Say, taking the example of SO2, 5,200 means the emission allowance for SO2 for Lemma Power Station, and 2 gigawatt hours means the emission allowance, the maximum emission allowance is 2 gigawatt hours, and A means the actual output. And if the actual output is the same as the maximum allowance, then there is no need for any adjustment. But according to Mr. Sin's example, say if due to some unknown reasons the intake of RE and WTE is in fact larger than the one that we designed, then for example if A is 3, then it will result in a negative number, and we want to encourage power companies to use RE and WTE the best they can. So in such circumstances, the emission allowance should be lowered, but the amount would not be substantial, because if it's 2 minus 3, then multiply it by 0.614, then the number will be small. Anyway, Mr. Sin is correct to point this out. in terms of the power generated by in the form of RTE and WTE, the percentage vis-à-vis the total number of total amount of power generation is small. It's smaller than 0.01%. So this is the background. So in fact, the SO2, NOx, RSP, altogether the amount is just a delta. If the baseline is 2, that means the total percentage is just 0.01% or so. Madam Chair, basically Mr. Sin is correct. This is the starting point. But as I said just now, in the third TM, this is the first time we introduce the intake of RE and WTE in the formula. And if we have more WTE facilities in the future, the baseline will not be 2, perhaps much larger, and the effect will be magnified. So basically, if you look at this table, the figures will be around 5,209, 450 and 250, etc. Basically so. I'm sorry, I only saw Mr. Sin raising his hand just now, so your turn. It's okay. Just a follow-up question. Well, please go back and check your formula. In fact, it's wrong. You said that it will be reduced, but in fact, this cannot be done because 5,200 and then plus, and then, all right, if A is 3, that means it's a negative number. And, well, okay, never mind about that. 2 points. I stand to be corrected, but just now I heard Mr. Lai say that there is a low emission coal which will allow for a reduction in emission. And now it's stipulated that the 50% of the fuel mix is natural gas. And for the east-west transmission of natural gas and also the natural gas field of Yacheng, according to our agreement, is not yielding good results. So my question is whether there is any complementing mechanism. That is, whether this low-emission coal can take the place of the Yacheng natural gas, so that overall speaking, we still see a reduction in emission. Next, in the third TM, well, you said that you anticipate a growth in the power consumption in the coming 2 years. So what about energy saving? Will there be any element of energy saving in your formula as one of the directions of emission reduction? Third point, a question. I wonder if you know the answer. For renewable energy, much resources have been deployed in the past, and the output is not high. So as far as the capital structure of the power plants, do you know the details? Well, let me answer the last part of your question first about the capital investments for renewable energy vis-à-vis the overall capital investment. In fact, there are 3 sources of energy for power generation in Hong Kong. One is coal-fired generation units, one is natural gas-fired generation units, and the third one is renewable energy facilities. Although natural gas amounts to 50% of the total fuel mix, it will gradually decrease because after 1997, as a matter of government policy, no new coal-fired generation units will be built. So when these units retire, if we look for other new generation units, we can only consider gas-fired generation units or renewable energy, but not coal-fired generation units from the perspective of environmental protection. So as the coal-fired generation units gradually retire, in terms of the fuel mix, coal will gradually reduce in terms of the percentage. And we also encourage power companies to invest more in renewable energy and waste-to-energy facilities. Wind farms and solar power is just a starting point, and the two power companies have indicated their interest in building more wind farms, and the scale will be much larger than the existing solar system, and the government is waiting for the detailed proposal.
And there's a need to go through the EIA process before the administration can give the approval. As for the scheme control, greater incentive is given to the power companies to resort to RE. The permitted profit is linked to capital investment, and the ROE of renewable energy the rate of return for renewable energy investment can be as high as 11% in comparison with 9.99 for capital investment in other kinds of power plants or power generation units. As for energy saving, we encourage individuals and companies to save energy. In setting the emission caps, we need to be objective. We have to consider the actual power consumption of Hong Kong over the years. In the past few years, with regard to demand for electricity, it is still increasing. We need to be pragmatic. Since demand for electricity is still growing, we cannot ask the power companies to generate less power. Otherwise, there will be a blackout, and that's not what we want to see. I'm asking for saving energy, energy-saving measures, rather than generating less power. Now, it is not reflected in the technical memorandum. We do encourage individuals, households, and companies to cut their power consumption. We have the ECF, and we spend about $200 million on encouraging residential units to make use of residential buildings, to make use of energy-saving measures, such as using more CFLs, and also upgrade their lifts and escalators in terms of saving energy. Yet, there is still a rising demand for power, and we need to take that into account in formulating the technical memorandum. There is an objective, this is a fact, there is a rising demand for electricity. But we will step up our efforts on energy conservation. After 2 years, if we find the measures effective, and if our demand for electricity after 2 years is declining, then that will be reflected in the technical memorandum. Because of the decline in demand for electricity, the generation of electricity can be reduced. Well, I understand this. Concerning the tariff structure of the CLP, there is a large quantity discount Now, in the technical memorandum, now the power consumption of this company, or rather the power consumption of this chamber is more, much more than the power consumption of the old electrical chamber. Do you have any incentive to force the private sector to consider energy-saving measures? You also give subsidy to the tariff accounts. It seems that the government is encouraging people to consume more energy. In considering reducing power generation, it seems that there is no incentive for the power companies to encourage people to consume less electricity. How are you going to do that? In terms of the tariff structure, can you follow that of the taxation arrangement? Or maybe, say, for example, or let me put it in another way, if you consume more, you have to pay more in terms of a higher rate. We understand your point, Madam Chairman and Mr. Wu. On one hand, in terms of tariff structure, whether that should be adjusted, that will be looked into under the tariff adjustment mechanism. As for demand management measures, we will focus our effort on consumers and households and companies. And if that is effective, or if these demand management measures are effective, then the overall demand for electricity will decline, and then the power generation should be reduced accordingly, and that will be reflected in the technical memorandum. But this has to be based on the facts, and there are many factors contributing to power consumption. Now this year, in this year, there is a significant increase in power consumption. It is because at the beginning of the year it was rather humid, and there was more use of the humidifiers. And also the summer season began earlier, and people switch on their air conditioners earlier, and these are things outside our control. Two more questions. Well, you don't need to explain the formula to me. Now, since the technical memorandum is binding, you should enhance your efforts to require the power companies to think more on energy, on demand management. And that will make sure the resources more effective. I don't ask them to build new coal-fired power stations or coal-fired units. I just want to know whether there can be any replacement or substitution arrangement between gas and low-emission coal, so that the tariff can be the optimal for the consumers. As for the gas and coal ratio, about 20 or so percent by gas and 70% by coal. Because of the Yachang gas supply, for CLP is not very stable. Therefore, in the past, the percentage of gas-fired generation was lower. But we expect that the gas from the West or the West-East gas transportation project will be materialized. The ratio of coal-fired generation will be reduced. Therefore, in the second TM and the third TM, the percentage of gas-fired power generation will be increased. Therefore, the pollution caused by power generation will be reduced. As for the use of low-emission coal, in fact, the power companies are using two types of coal. One is ordinary coal, the other is low-emission coal. In the second TM, we expect that the coal will account for about, this type of coal will account for about 20 or so %. The emission level of low-emission coal is rather desirable, and there is more room for the power companies to use about 40% of power generation by low-emission coal. Apart from increasing the power generation by gas, we also require the power companies to generate low-emission power by low-emission coal. Can we require the power companies to generate coal energy by 100% of coal emission, low-emission coal? That is not quite possible, because the supply of low-emission coal is rather limited, and the power companies can only get low-emission coal from Indonesia. In the long term, there is still uncertainty. And with regard to low-emission coal, the thermal capacity of thermal coal is lower than ordinary coal. So by burning the same quantity of low-emission coal vis-a-vis ordinary coal, the quantity of power generated is relatively smaller, and that's why the power company is not able to switch to low-emission coal completely. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Now you are going. The EPD is going to publish the new set of AQOs. Under the new TM, say SO2, we know that SO2 accounts for half of the total emission in Hong Kong, and we are going to cut it by 17%. The target is to cut 17% of SO2 emission by power plants. If you look at the new sets of AQOs, SO2 from 350 to 125 in the first phase. The first interim target is 125 from 350. The cut is rather substantial. SO2, as far as SO2 is concerned, you just want to cut the power, the emission by power companies to by 17%. So how can we achieve the new AQO target as far as SO2 is concerned? In the first phase, the target for SO2 is 125, and then to 50, and then to 20 according to WHO standard. You understand what I mean? If our pace of cutting SO2 by power companies is so slow, how can we achieve the objective?
Madam Chair, perhaps I'll give a general response before I defer to Mr. Mok for a more detailed answer. Now, if the 30M takes effect, that means that starting from 2017, the SO2 emission, comparing to the emission SO2 emission in 2015 will be reduced by 17%. And this is based on the number of tons of SO2 emitted. And Mr. Kwok's question was about the new proposal to be tabled next year on the formulation of the new set of AQO. And we have taken into account the room for power companies to reduce emission. Power companies is not the only source of SO2 emission. In terms of vehicle emissions, we also can make some effort to reduce emission. So in the new set of air quality objectives, in tightening the standards, we're talking about the concentration levels. It may not be directly pegged to the number of tons emitted. If the overall tonnage is decreased, it will definitely be conducive to reducing or to meeting the AQO. So with the new TM, the quantity of SO2 emission will be reduced, and it's correlated to the concentration of SO2. Do you expect to meet the interim target of 125? Is it easy to achieve or not? Mr. Mo. Well, simply put, we should be able to meet the new proposed AQO. Yes, for the power companies, our proposal is that the SO2 emission will be reduced by 17%. But in fact, before the third TM, in the second TM, which will take effect in 2015, comparing to 2010, half of the SO2 emissions from power companies have been reduced. So this is a substantial decrease in terms of SO2 emission in Hong Kong. And we're proposing a further reduction in the third TM. So we're talking about some 60 or 70% cut in SO2 emission, which is very substantial. And as mentioned by Deputy Director, we are making efforts at the same time in reducing the reduction for other sources of emission. For example, vehicles, diesel vehicles and vessels. So we take a multi-pronged approach in reducing emission to meet the SO2 target. Mr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Administration, for explaining to us in detail the relevant emission allowances. I have a few questions. I'm looking at para 17 of the paper about consultation, and it says that the two local power companies considered the proposed new emission allowances extremely challenging. So I'd like to know the reasons behind this claim of the allowances being extremely challenging. So for members' benefit, please tell us what justifications they have put forward so that you have come up with this conclusion. And many members find it not very meaningful in reading this third TM. I have this Clean Air Action an environmental protection group paper, and it criticizes the TM for being too mild. So I'd like to know more about this. In particular, they point out that in terms of the emission target for nitrogen oxides, the actual emission in 2010 they make comparisons with the actual emission quantity and the targets in 2015 and 2017, and the reduction is 17%, so on and so forth. And for the 7-year emission reduction target for NO or nitrogen oxides, the target is just a 4% reduction, and they think that the target is too conservative, and they are speaking from the perspective of public health. So I'd like to represent the environmental protection groups and offer their views. Now, for information, in the paper forwarded to us in October 2012, the two local power companies consider the proposed emission allowances extremely challenging. But also, for your information, in another paper issued to us in June, the the CLP is committed to working closely with the administration to support the new emissions allowances, so on and so forth. The HEC considers that meeting the proposed reduced emission allowances from 2017 onwards is very challenging. It stresses the need for a long-term policy on increase of the use of natural gas for electricity generation, as gas suppliers have no flexibility for any ad hoc natural gas supply. Both companies also indicated that achievement of new targets is based on a stable supply of low-emission coals with consistent properties, which could not be assured in the very volatile fuel market, so on and so forth. So I just want to point out that the HEC considers that that the emission allowances is very challenging in the June paper, whereas in the October paper, both companies find it very challenging. I'd like to apologize, first of all, because this paper is somewhat condensed version. The wording used is somewhat condensed because, in fact, over the past few months, there hasn't been any progress. Well, the administration is being quite frank. In fact, during the last term, at a meeting in July, the administration briefed members at the time the outcome of the negotiation with the two power companies, and that was the outcome of the final negotiation with the two power companies at the time. And concerning the emission allowances, we have not made any progress in terms of the negotiation with power companies. So the paper in April should have reflected the situation, whereas for the new paper, it is a somewhat condensed version. So members may find some discrepancies in the two papers. But I'd like to stress that no new development has taken place, nor have we encountered new difficulties. So just to explain to Dr. Chen, when negotiating with the two power companies, they were of the view that the new emission allowances would be very challenging for them, and is based on three major reasons. First is on the procurement of low-emission coal, and as I explained just now, in terms of the overall mode of power generation, the third TM is similar to the second TM in terms of the fuel mix. If they can make more use of natural gas, of course there is room to further lower the cap. But if there is no substantial change in the mode of power generation, they would find it very hard to further reduce the cap. And on the procurement of low-emission coal, this is their concern because at present they can only procure low-emission coals in India. And because of political uncertainties in India, in Indonesia, this is their concern because supply may run short. Third is about the generation units. Now, if the fuel mix between natural gas and coal in the third TM is similar to that in the second TM, why have we proposed a substantial decrease of 17%? How can this be achieved? Well, basically, we request them to make more use of low-emission coals. And secondly, between 2009 and 2011, for both power companies, they have retrofitted the coal-fired generation units with desulfurization devices, and the result was better than expected. And because of this good effort of desulfurization, we urge the power companies to maintain this level, and this is a challenge for power companies because when the generation unit is new, then they may get 100% efficiency, but with the aging of machinery, it's understandable that the efficiency may decrease. So in order to keep up with their good effort, they may need to maintain the machinery, and there could be uncertainties, so they find it challenging. However, we also explained to the power companies that the public, as well as the LegCo, aspires to improvement in air quality. So after rounds of negotiation and discussion and persuasion, they have finally taken on board our proposed emission reduction arrangement. So they will be committed, but they have stressed that there are uncertainties. Second question, I'll defer to Mr. Pang. Madam Chair, Dr. Chan asked about the relatively mild reduction in the emission of nitrogen oxides. And how can we reduce nitrogen oxides or nitrogen dioxide reduction? It's different from SO2 emission when we can install desulfurization devices. Nitrogen oxides are generated in the process of coal firing, in the process of condensation. And in the last TM, we have required them to prioritize the use of their coal-fired generation units with advanced emission abatement equipment. And with increased electricity consumption, the coal-fired generation units without such abatement equipment will have to be used as well, thereby causing an increase in the emission. And therefore, we have asked them to use more low-emission coal. But there is also a limit because the coal-fired generation units are not originally designed for the use of low emission coals, but there are problems because of the thermal capacity and low flash point, and there might also be the problem of self-combustion of low emission coals, and this may also affect the safety of boilers. So last time we asked for a percentage of 20% in terms of the use of low-emission coal, and this time we asked for an increase up to 40%.
Low-emission coal can only reduce nitrogen oxides slightly, unlike the reduction in ash and SO2. Low-emission coal has very low sulfur content, maybe as low as 0.1, 0.2%. But as for NOx, they are the result of combustion. The use of low-emission coal will not lead to a substantial reduction in NOx. Therefore, the reduction in NOx cannot be very substantial. Before members ask the second round, I want to ask the first round concerning the para 8 of the electrical brief. After 2017, the limits are 90, 230, and 7. Now, how do you come up with the basis or the starting point? Now, the TM is between 2017 to 2019. With regard to new electricity works after 2017, what do you expect? My main concern is introduction of nuclear power. The country's nuclear power policy has been suspended because of the Fukushima incident. And starting from July, the national policy was reinstated as far as nuclear power is concerned. But your paper has not changed. Concerning the new electricity works, or NEWs, what will they be? Will they be coal-fired stations, renewable energy units, or gas units? Now you say you don't permit any new coal-fired units. Well, if it is about nuclear energy, it is something outside our boundary, it will be outside our control. When Sarah Liu was the secretary, there was the cross-boundary emission trading. Would that be taken into your account? Madam Chairman, I will speak on the general situation, and my colleague, Mr. Pang, will supplement. Your understanding is correct. As for new electricity works, in setting the new emission caps, we consider how the local power companies are to meet local demand adequately, how much quantity of power will be generated locally, and how much pollutants will be emitted. We base our cap on meeting local demand by local power generation. We encourage competition in the electricity market. If there is a new company which wants to be a new power supplier in Hong Kong, under the present policy, Madam Chairman, your understanding is correct. If it is about emission limit, then the power company will have to use gas-fired units. If they use renewable energy or solar energy, for example, that will not affect the cap because there is zero emission. If there is a new power supplier and it wants to build new generators, then the formula applies. As for nuclear energy, if Hong Kong is to purchase more nuclear power to meet local needs, this will not affect our emission caps. If we have bought more nuclear energy, and local generation can therefore be reduced, then it will become a basis for reducing the emission caps. We cannot regulate things that happen across the boundary, but we can do something about that locally. And as for the basis for calculation, Mr. Pang will speak on that. This paragraph doesn't apply to the two power companies. It applies only to new power companies. They can invest in a 300 gigawatt unit. Starting from 1997, if there is a new power generation unit, whether it is by the two power companies or a new power company, it will only be a gas-fired unit. And gas-fired units have a higher efficiency. They will at least be able to install a 3 gigawatt unit, which will account for about 17% or 1% of the supply. That will enable them to enter the market if they have a generation unit and they can provide at least that amount of power supply. And we think the arrangement will provide room for a new power company to enter the market. And every 2 years, we will conduct a review on the TM. And if it can be more aggressive and obtain customers, or take away customers from the two power companies, and in the next review, that will be reflected in the TM. If it is the existing power company, then it can use the current cap. This is only for a new power company. From 2012 to 2017, is it likely to have a new power company? I think it's very unlikely. Whether it will appear or not, we don't know, but the mechanism allows its appearance. Now, from getting a site to build a unit, to build a generation unit, to get the franchise agreement, and to, unless you breach all the rules, you really can't get a power generation unit up and running between 2012 to 2017. Well, it will be very difficult. If there is a new power supplier and it wants to set up a new gas-fired unit in Hong Kong in terms of the choice of the site and the EIA requirement, the company has to comply with all the statutory requirements. And under such circumstances, to build such a generation unit within 3 to 5 years will be very unlikely. With regard to the cap on new electricity works, there is such a provision in the previous. There was such a provision in the previous TMs. This is to enable to allow new entrants, but whether there is a new entrance, it depends on market. Well, if that really happened, you will say that I've told you so. And you just don't speak up. You just didn't speak up. Mr. Sim. Well, It is in, I believe it is in the principal ordinance. Is there any penalty if there is any breach? 2 levels of penalty. If the cap is exceeded on the first offense, $30,000 per 1 ton in excess. If it is a repeated offense, then $60,000 per ton in excess. Speaker is not coming through. What do you mean by first or second offense? The cap is pertaining to each power station in the year. You have to do the calculation after the completion of a year. Say, for example, 2017, 2018, there is such a cap. We have to wait for the completion of the year 2017, and then we do the sums, and we found that in 2017, your SO2 cap is 100 tons, and you've emitted 120 tons. We can only catch the power company after it has exceeded the cap for the year. We can only do the prosecution afterwards. And according to the principal ordinance, for the first breach, the first offense, $30,000 per ton. The second offense, $60,000 per ton with an imprisonment of 6 months. And it's not just by paying the money. In the next year, the emission cap will be reduced by the same amount. Say if in the first year there is an excess of emission, then in the second year, in the cap, we will reduce the cap on the cap. We'll reduce it by the same amount of excess. The CLP came to lobby us on tariffs. There will be discussion on tariffs, tariff increase. Now, we don't have strong views concerning the environmental protection measures, but if we put it against tariffs, then it may be very different. Now, the requirement is to increase the gas-fired generation by up to 50%, and I really don't know what the tariffs will be, or how high the tariffs will be. Now, if we pass the TM, what will be the implication on tariffs? And when we discuss tariffs, we can't go back to adjusting the TM. If we don't endorse this TM, but we first go to discuss the tariffs, will that be even more reasonable? Now we have only one solution, but we don't know how much we have to foot the bill. And would it be acceptable by the community at large? And will the administration be willing to bear some of the cost?
Understand Mr. Wu's concern. Tariff and environmental protection are both matters of public concern. But I think that as far as today's purpose is concerned, we should separate the two matters, because the third TM is about the regulation imposed on the two power companies as far as the emission allowance is concerned, starting from 2017, whereas for tariff adjustment, this will happen next year. So there is no direct correlation between the two matters. So starting from next year, what would be the proposed tariff increase by the two power companies? These things have happened. For example, increase in the prices of natural gas, so on and so forth. I think these factors, these have been factored in their proposal for tariff adjustment. They won't say that they're facing huge pressure because of the need to comply with the emission caps in 2015 and 2017. This shouldn't happen. As for the percentage of natural gas in the third TM, the fuel mix is around 50%. That's similar to the second TM endorsed by LegCo. In the third TM, we have not specifically requested the power companies to increase substantially the percentage of natural gas. Therefore, the third TM should not be a factor for power companies to say that their costs have increased. If they make such allegation, this should be about the second TM endorsed 2 years ago, when the administration requested the two power companies to substantially increase the use of natural gas. So that this should be a factor for their consideration 2 years ago. Now, concerning the natural gas prices, according to the agreement signed 2 years ago, we're seeing a discrepancy. But the promised return will be lowered from 12.5% to 9.99%. At first it was 15%, but after 2 rounds of adjustment, it has been adjusted downward to 9.99%. And from the perspective of the affordability of users, there should be room for further reduction from 9.99%. And also, as mentioned, as far as the tariff structure is concerned, whether a progressive tariff structure can be adopted so that for those users with lower consumption, the tariff will be less, and this will be used as a means to encourage the public to save energy. I agree with Madam Chair, but this one is very price neutral, this TM. Okay, a point of information about renewable energy and the capital investment for renewable energy. What is the percentage in terms of the total capital investment by these two power companies? Do you have this information? For renewable energy, the promised return is 11%, slightly higher. Now, the permitted return, the maximum permitted return for renewable energy is higher than that for conventional energy. As for the capital investment for RE, I don't have this information at hand. I can ask the Bureau whether this information can be disclosed. Of course, it must be disclosed when you conduct a review. The two power companies have all along refused to disclose this information, and that's why the Council has taken a rather heavy-handed approach. So let me say this in the outset, that this information should be disclosed. Madam Chair, but I ask for your understanding because I am not responsible for formulating policies. And, of course, this information is available, but I need to ask my colleagues in what ways should this information be made available. Well, last time there was an incident. There was a stack of paper. The information was given to members, and it was put in the library for members' perusal. But in the end, we found that the information was not that confidential after all. So I asked the administration to give us the information beforehand. And perhaps a soft copy should be provided instead of stacks of paper for 17 members. Any other questions? If not, I'll invite Clerk to speak about the schedule of meetings or the timetable. Now, I ask members to refer to the members' brief. In paragraph 7, it sets out the legislative timetable. The expiry of scrutiny period is the 21st of November, and deadline for giving notice of amendment is 14th of November. And if members wish to extend the scrutiny period, if the scrutiny period is not extended, Madam Chair will have to make a verbal report this Friday during the House Committee meeting. And because of the negative vetting process, no voting will be carried out. But if members would like to speak on the relevant subject, for example, tariff, you may wish to do a warm-up beforehand. So if you want to speak on the subject, please inform the Secretariat. Please remember to sign the receipt, or else you might not get a chance to speak. Well, Madam Chair, you can be our representative, and we can inform the HC. We'll see if any members would like to speak, and we will inform the House Committee to reserve a time slot on this TM. I'm sorry, before the meeting's adjourned, I'd like to ask another question. Now, right now, the fuel mix, as far as natural gas or gas-fired generation units is concerned, is 25%. And this can already meet the targets in the second TM. Is this the case, or will the target be met only if the fuel mix is increased to 50% natural gas? Mr. Pan. Now, the present ratio meets the standard in the first TM. As for the second TM, the percentage of natural gas will have to be increased to 50%, starting from 2015. As for 2017, on this basis, we have not asked the companies to increase the use of natural gas for the purpose of reducing emission. Thank you, members. So we only need one meeting. Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.